We go. Good evening. My name is Lonnie Douglas. I am with the Eugene Springfield Solidarity Network.
And I am Anne Fournier, and I am here representing Solidarity Action Network, or SAN, which is here and which is at the ESSN's partner organization.
Yes, our 501c4.
Yes.
So we are here today with Eliza. I don't want to say this name wrong because
Kashinsky.
I was right. Okay.
Good. So Eliza, and what position are you running for again?
Ward 1 City Councilor for Eugene.
Ward 1. That's the big race. Lots of them. Lots of people.
Yeah, it's really exciting. It's over the years we've seen something like 4 city council races in Eugene go to the general. Most incumbent city councilors run unopposed, so I'm really excited that so many people have joined in for this race.
Yeah. All right. So real quick, ESSN, I want to put out there to everybody, ESSN and SAN do not endorse candidates. So these interviews are not an endorsement of any kind. It's simply an opportunity for the community to be able to get to know you, the candidate, a little bit better, and hopefully make a more informed decision when the ballots come out. We're doing this and we put it out together on the fly because of the corona outbreak, and knowing that you guys can't go knock on doors, you can't do house parties or forums and debates and stuff. So we really want to find just another option or another way for you to be able to engage with the public.
Well,
that being said, why don't we go ahead and let you roll in and just let people know who you are and what you're about.
All right, well, I'll get started. As I said, I'm Eliza Kashinsky, and I'm running for Eugene City Council in Ward 1. I want to start out by thanking you for organizing this. As you said, this is a really difficult time, and I really appreciate everybody and everybody's efforts as we address the crisis that we're facing right now. I do want to admit that I'm a little weird. When I get bored, I don't pull out a jigsaw puzzle. I pull out the city zoning code. I read the city budget. I watch old city council meetings. For the past 5 years, I've spent most of my evenings and weekends working to try and help make Eugene a better place. I've served on Eugene's Active Transportation Committee. I'm currently on the Eugene's Budget Committee. I've worked diligently through the Walkable Eugene Citizen Advisory Network, or WECAN, to help ensure that the voices of those who want to see more affordable, diverse, walkable housing and neighborhoods in our community are heard. Through that work, I've noticed a number of different things. I've seen how, while so many Eugenians are working so diligently and tirelessly to confront the challenges that face us, our city leaders have voted again and again to delay solutions. I've seen Eugene declare that we are going to take bold action on climate, on housing to help the unhoused, and then 4, 5, 10 years pass, and many of those actions don't materialize. I've seen the way that while many of the problems we have tie together, safety, transportation, climate, housing, homelessness, economics, equity, these are all interconnected. They need solutions that are going to work together, that are going to be sustainable for the long term. And unfortunately, many of the base systems on which we have built our city aren't sustainable. They aren't environmentally sustainable. They aren't economically sustainable. They aren't just. The longer we wait to begin truly addressing that, the harder it's going to be. We are facing a housing shortage, a climate emergency, a homelessness crisis, and all of that was even before we entered this period of an unprecedented public health and economic disaster. As a community, we have the vision and the passion to solve these challenges. We have all of the things, we have plans of all of the things that we know we need to do in order to reduce our climate impact and provide housing for options for Eugenians of all income levels, to help build a more sustainable and prosperity for the future. But when it comes time to actually do the things that are in the plans, it seems too often like our city is timid. We hold another public process or we have another work session. We don't have the luxury of being timid. The national political climate is hostile and dysfunctional. We're facing unprecedented challenges at the moment. We can't wait for others to fix this for us. We need to figure out how to do it here, first, now. Eugene can and should be a leader in solving these challenges. Yes, some of the decisions are hard. Change is always hard. But we are asking many of our residents to make hard choices without a lot of good options every day. We can't expect less from our city leaders. We need city councilors who have the vision, the passion, the knowledge, and the ability to confront the challenges that face us, to make the hard decisions that need to be made. As your city councilor, I will work every day to help make Eugene more sustainable and just. Let's get it done.
All right. Thank you very much. So our first question for you today is about housing and specifically the homelessness crisis, because it doesn't take a crystal ball to see that the current recession will exacerbate Eugene's affordable housing crisis and force yet more residents onto the streets. So how will you respond both to the immediate crisis in homelessness and housing instability, but also what measures will you take over the longer term to help Eugene's unhoused?
So I think where we are right now is we're looking at some very specific public health guidance about how do we help people who are unhoused during the stay-at-home order. What happens when you're supposed to stay at home and you don't have a home to go to? One of the things that I think we really need to do is follow that public health guidance. What it's saying is that if people are sheltering somewhere in a tent or camping somewhere that's safe, we don't ask them to move, we don't try and relocate them. Unfortunately, the city has not always been following that. I know just 2 weeks ago, people who were camping in a park near my home at the behest of city council and some angry neighbors were forced to relocate. I think that we need to work on setting up more temporary shelters and things like that so that people have a place to go during this crisis. And I think so those kinds of immediate, how do we respond to this immediate crisis that we're in at this exact moment, I think are the things that we need to be focused on at this moment. And, you know, there's been some very good things the city has done and some things that I wish they hadn't done. In the longer term, I really see a couple of different ways that we need to look at this. First is overall housing affordability and supply. I think there's another question later on that gets a little bit more in depth to that, so I'll focus on the other two things. I also think we need to be working really robustly with the county and the state when it comes to looking at mental health and substance use treatments. I work for a mental health agency in Cottage Grove, and so I see firsthand every day sort of how the way that this system works isn't working and isn't serving people as well as we need it to be. And so really making that system more robust, that's something that needs to be done in partnership with the county and with the state. And with individual service providers, that needs to be a very collaborative effort. And then I think the last thing is really looking at the TAC report. That's the plan that the city has put out, that they worked with the county to create, that really is sort of trying to be that roadmap of how do we provide outreach, how do we provide emergency shelter that leads into full shelter. One of the things that I've been really, I think, disappointed about was the length of time it's taken us to get going on that report. You know, the initial request to have the $1 million set aside for the public shelter, I've been on budget committee for 3 years now, and that was before my time. And so the fact that we haven't spent that money yet is a little concerning. But, you know, really getting that to move much faster, I think, is a important next step.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
How about we move on to the payroll tax question? Liz, do you have any follow-up questions that you wanted to ask Lonnie?
Well, I maybe a little bit, and the payroll tax may roll into that a little bit, but we do talk, you know, everybody's been talking about implementing the strategies in the TAC report, providing services, things like that. I would ask, what would you, with us having the especially with the COVID, we're obviously going to have even more problems with funding and generating revenue. Do you have any ideas on how to pay for the services that we need to implement?
I had a bunch of ideas that I now need to reconsider in light of the current crisis. One of the things that I've noticed about Oregon is that if you think about revenue as a three-legged stool, you have sort of property tax as a very base way that you generate revenue. You have income taxes of various sorts, and you have consumption taxes of various sorts. And Oregon is a two-legged stool. And I think a lot of the ways our revenue and our finance are done in the state are very unbalanced and very unequitable. And so there's going to need to be a lot of work that is more creative than I think the work that we've done in the past to figure that out. A lot of the specifics I had, I feel like now, over the past few weeks, has become clear that now is not the right time for them. But I do think that more creativity than just going back to the same wells is what's needed.
Okay.
Is raising the construction excise tax among one of the things that you think would be a good future reform?
I would have to, I certainly think we shouldn't be subsidizing the construction excise tax out of the general fund. I think that I would have to have more specifics about exactly what that would look like and how it would be implemented. One of the things that I've spent a lot of time on is what goes into making housing more expensive. And so one of the things that I've seen is the way that there are I've tried to break down, okay, how do you build a less expensive house for people? What is it that's caused the cost of new housing to go up so much? And it is it's like being nibbled to death by ducks. There's a million tiny little things that when you add them all together, they result in housing being more expensive. And so I think that there are ways that you could construct it so that that would work, but without just sort of as a flat, let's make it bigger. I would want a little bit more of what that would actually look like.
Yeah, I was just asking as a conceptual response to,
yeah.
Because some people are like, no, the construction excise tax is bad. So, but.
Why don't we roll into the next our next question? So last June, the city council voted to implement a payroll tax in Eugene. They also decided and voted to not refer that controversial tax to the voters. So we were talking a little bit about taxes. What's your stance on payroll taxes in general? And do you agree with the city council's decision to not allow voters to weigh in on this tax?
So I'll answer each part of that question separately. So through Budget Committee, I was actually on the subcommittee that discussed revenue sources for the Community Safety Initiative, and those discussions ultimately led to the payroll tax. Throughout that process, I was very vocal. I think everybody in that room got sick of hearing me say it, that I did not think that was the right solution. One of the things that I saw with that is that Eugene or Oregon has one of the highest income tax rates across the country. I was talking a little bit about sort of the three-legged stool and that unbalancedness there. Regardless of whether you call it a payroll tax or an income tax, what we're ultimately doing there is taxing people's wages, the money that they're working to earn so that they can buy housing, they can buy food. And I feel like continuing to go back to that same well of people's wages isn't appropriate, and that's something that we really need to be looking for other solutions for. So as I said, I was very vocal that I didn't think that that was the right solution at the time, though, and again, not everyone agreed with me on that one, clearly. As far as whether it should have been referred to the voters, I do think that part of the reason why we elect representatives, why I'm running for an office right now, is because not everything can be sent to the ballot to the voters. And so really what I'm looking at is, I really wish people would vote more in the primaries, vote more for their city councilors, because who you select in those processes does matter. Because even if, we decide to send some of the decisions to the ballot, we can't send all of them. So.
All right.
Okay, let's move on to let's go back to affordable housing right now, because Eugene does have one of the worst affordable housing shortages in the country, or affordable housing and low-income housing, all of it, housing. Definitely, any way you slice it, housing is in crisis. So what approach do you think the city should take to resolving the housing crisis?
So, as I said in my opening statement, when I get bored or stressed out, I read zoning code. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what is the dynamics of how do we build housing in Eugene? How have we gotten to where we are? What are the decisions we've made? And one of the things that I've seen is that the systems that we've created for housing in our community, which are common around the country, are systems that are fundamentally inequitable, they're fundamentally exclusionary, and they fundamentally make housing more expensive. And the outcome that we see in Eugene now is the natural result of the systems and the policies that we've had in place since 1935 in order to build our city. The way that we've designed our city has led to this. And so I think that one of the things we really need to do is really look at the concepts behind our zoning, behind our housing. And this comes across in the way that in so many different ways. When you look at even the application process, it affects both market rate developers. It also affects affordable housing developers. People who are building like specifically subsidized low-income housing, those projects cost more to build because of some of the ways that this is structured. And so I really think a good starting place is to really re-examine the concepts behind how we're building housing in Eugene, and really work on redoing those. I could talk about zoning for a really long time. So I'm sure I'm going to run out of time eventually. But I do think we start with implementing House Bill 2001, which allows for more duplexes, triplexes, other forms of more efficient housing in our neighborhoods. We stop saying that some areas we're not going to allow certain types of housing in because we don't want people who have different needs to be in the neighborhood. I think we need to stop every time it stops coming up. Stop trying to kind of say, let's keep things the way that they are, because the way that things isn't working.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I had a working from home lovely experience of large crashing, so I didn't catch every little bit of your answer, but I did want to follow up on this housing question, because we were just talking to Councillor Semple, and it does seem like, and we've also talked and done research into the other people in your race, and it seems like one of the areas of policy difference that people are disagreeing about is the approach to, I guess, what some people would just call upzoning, because there are some people arguing that we should just focus greater density solely along transport corridors and try and preserve areas that don't have a lot of ADUs or a lot of duplexes. So it seems like you fall much more onto the side of infill that isn't solely reserved to certain areas. Do you want to elaborate further on that a little bit so we make sure we understand that clear difference?
Yes. So what I will say is that I live in what is often classified as a single-family neighborhood. Across the street from me is a triplex. Next door to me is a house with a backyard alley access unit. I have a backyard that is underutilized that would be great to put an accessory dwelling unit on as soon as I can. Really, what we're looking at with this is that a lot of times when people say we don't want these new types of housing in our neighborhood, what they're trying to do is sort of freeze their neighborhood in amber. But that's not how neighborhoods are designed. Neighborhoods grow, they change, they should be able to evolve over time. One of the things that makes my neighborhood great is that it was able to evolve over time. And when we talk about this infill, we're not talking about like 80-story buildings that take up the whole lot. A lot of the ways, when I'm talking about the way that the systems work, we've designed our systems to limit the number of people in the neighborhood, as opposed to the buildings, the way that the buildings look. You can have a duplex that looks exactly like a detached single-family home, and the only way that you know it's a duplex is just because you have two families living there as opposed to one. And so I think a lot of this has been, it's become very controversial. But when you look back to the roots of the style of zoning we have, I went to the library to see if I could figure out the exact motivations for Eugene passing it. And unfortunately, when I went, the microfilm machine was broken, so I couldn't look up the 1935 Register Guard articles. But this style of zoning was passed with the idea of keeping people out of neighborhoods, keeping people of different income levels, of different races, preserving those neighborhoods for people who they thought were desirable. That was the explicit intent between the style of zoning that we have. I haven't been able to determine, because again, microfiche machine was broken, whether or not that was Eugene's specific intent. I certainly know it's not necessarily the intent of the people who are advocating for keeping that type of zoning. But when you look at what that zoning does, even if that's not your intent, that's the outcome. And that's not an outcome that I can support.
Thank you.
All right. So, I got to see where we are on the questions here. I'm sorry,
Okay.
listening to you, but no. So, for Eugene, let's see. The need to incentivize affordable housing development can place landowners and developers, affordable or low-income housing advocates, and labor groups at odds. So, how will you manage the conflict between the 1% or the wealthy developers and such, and the rest of the community, the working class community? And a lot of this question kind of goes to less about money and more about access to you as an elected official, or access to our city council in general.
Yeah, so I think maybe two pieces with that. First of all, one of the things I want to acknowledge is that I definitely draw a distinction between smaller local developers, in many cases, who are trying to build housing that we need, trying to do so in a responsible way, and sort of bigger kind of out-of-state conglomerate developers who don't really care about our community. And so I think one of the things is kind of unpacking that difference between people who their job is to build houses, and they're trying to do so in a way, they care about Eugene, they're in Eugene, they're part of Eugene, and they're trying to do so in a way that is good for Eugene, versus, sort of big developers. And I think there's a mix in there, and I think a lot of times this gets trickier because we kind of lump them all in together. With that said, one of the things that I've definitely been very frustrated by in my interactions with council was who gets listened to. To a large degree, it feels like whoever feels the most empowered to shout the loudest gets heard way easier, particularly if they're shouting about something the councilors are kind of leaning towards anyway. I've seen this a lot with housing related issues, where what will happen is, there'll be a proposal that will come out, you'll get a bunch of angry emails going to council, and something like the thing gets changed in such a way that it's no longer accomplishing the goal it was intended to. So one of the things that I think about a lot of this with access is that you can't, it is in a lot of ways a privilege to be able to have your voice heard at council. If you're able to go at 7 p.m. and yell at them, or even make a polite, rational comments, that's something that not everybody in our community is able to do. You think about who can send them emails, who can, spend the time to do those things, like people who have 2 jobs and kids, that may not be their top priority. And so one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how to take something that I do in my job and implement that on a city level. I'm the human resources manager for a mental health agency. I have responsibility for all 100 staff who work in many different jobs, many different roles. One of the things that I try and do, I'm not always, like, I clearly haven't done it for the past month, but one of the things I try and do is go to the different team meetings of the different teams. I don't talk, I just sit in the back and listen. And the reason why I do that is because I want to understand what their life is like. What are the challenges that they're facing on a day-to-day basis? So that when there comes time that I have to make a decision, I don't just have who directly gave me feedback, who directly said, this is what I want, but also what the needs are of the folks who are too busy doing their jobs to come to my office and say, this is what I want. And so I haven't quite figured out exactly how that would work on a citywide level, but that's definitely the spirit that I want to take to it, not just listening to the people who feel empowered to come and tell me what they want, but seeking out the people who maybe can't even say, this is the policy I want you to implement, but who still have needs, desires, things that they would like to see the city doing.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to unpack that. I feel like we wrote these questions quickly, and I feel like that was kind of two rolled into one, because on the one hand, there is that access question, but then there's also, part of why it ended up being like the two types of developers grouped into one is that I know I wrote the first part of this question, and one of the things I was thinking of was labor disputes that have arisen in recent housing, some recent housing projects where you've had like developers and the workers that they've employed sort of placed on opposite sides of that issue. And so I was wondering how you would address those concerns, and address like the conflicts between the various stakeholder groups, because that was kind of also one of the things that we wanted.
Particularly between like labor and employers?
Yeah. So I guess the main thing, we have labor employers, and then sometimes like a large developer and activists, because there is a lot of conflict right now between those various stakeholder groups around housing development.
So I think, again, I'll go back to my day job. That's one of the things I have to do every day, is figure out how do you balance and negotiate those competing interests. As I mentioned, I'm the human resources manager, but I'm the human resources manager in an agency that doesn't have a union. And so I see a huge amount of my role as being the person who advocates for the employees, for making sure that the staff are treated well. That's what I've spent most of the past month and a half doing, is figuring out what our staff need to get through this crisis in a way that keeps them whole, and mitigates the impact to them as much as I possibly can. And so trying to find that balance, trying to find that negotiation, looking at the sort of legitimate hard realities and balancing that with what is ethical and what is right and what is the thing that needs to happen is, I think, I don't know that city councilors necessarily get involved specifically in those disputes, but finding that balance is what needs to happen, and helping people find that balance.
Okay. Let's see. You want to follow up that last closing question there, Ann?
Yes. So this last question, and which is rolled into an opportunity for you to give us just like your closing pitch, is what is your vision for the city? And as an elected representative, what role will you play in bringing that vision to reality?
One of the things that I've really been thinking about lately is sort of the difference between Eugene's government and its leadership versus its residents. when I interact with people in Eugene, they're creative, they're passionate, they're compassionate. They really work to solve tough challenges. And the things that I see people in our community doing are just frankly amazing. I think we have the capacity within us to be a leader in solving these things, to not be, okay, what has this city done about homelessness? What has that city done about climate change? But really coming up with these things ourselves. Because we're seeing, you look at things like Square One Villages, all of those types of things where these are brilliant ideas that are starting in Eugene. I think Eugene historically was, as a sort of city government, city organization, more creative along these lines. If you look at, for example, transportation infrastructure, we were building really robust bike lanes, bike networks, well before anyone else in the US. We had, we were one of the top biking cities in the 80s. And in a lot of ways that stagnated. What we're seeing is our active transportation, which of course is really important for addressing climate change, is actually going down. And we've now putting in a bike lane has become a controversial issue. And so really what I want to see is Eugene as a city government getting back to that level of innovativeness, back to that level of creativeness, back to that sense of we're not reacting out of fear, but we're really being progressive. And I do think that that's a thing that we can do. And so I feel like a lot of it is the sort of spirit that you bring to it. If you're a counselor who's saying, I want to hear, I want to do the things that the loudest voices are telling me to do, or I'm scared of doing this because people might, get mad at me and not like me and not vote for me anymore. We're not going to be able to have that sense of creativity and progressiveness as a city. But I think my vision is a city government that lives up to our residents in a way that helps us be a more sustainable and just city. And that's why I hope people will vote for me. I do have a website. It's www.electeliza.com and Facebook page as well, which I'm pretty sure if you just type in Elect Eliza, you'll find it. And so, as we get into this last month of the campaign, I hope I can reach out to as many people as I can and get a chance to get to know even more people in my neighborhood and in my ward. So, and thank you very much for hosting this.
Yes, outstanding. Thank you, Eliza. We appreciate you coming on and answering our questions. It was really nice. And we just want to remind people that these interviews are not endorsements of any candidates. It's simply so that you can get to know the candidate a little bit better and make a more informed decision when you are filling out your ballot. And just good luck on your candidacy.
Yeah, well, thank you. And thank you for hosting this.
Yeah.